take a few minutes just to introduce ourselves to all of you this morning. I'm really happy to be here with you. My name is Dr. Summer Erickson. I am not only the moderator, but also a panelist that will be assisting today. My background is a little bit here and there. I'm a meteorologist by trade, but I have been working in emergency management now for over 15 years. I started locally, and then I moved up to the FEMA federal level for the past 10 years, where I have been serving as a meteorologist and the liaison to the Storm Prediction Center. So this has been a interesting adventure. My PhD work focused on the interdisciplinary process between communication and weather information. Given that my background was in emergency management, I really saw the need to really assist in that vein. So I ended up sort of taking a different direction from meteorology and going that route and focusing more on the communication aspect, now working solitarily in the emergency management environment, but as a meteorologist. So that's a little bit about myself. So I will turn it over to the panelists and let them give you just a few minutes to talk about themselves and what it is they do. And so to start with, I will start with Felecia.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Felecia Bowser, and I am the Warning Coordination Meteorologist at the National Weather Service in Jackson, Mississippi. I've been working with the National Weather Service for going on 17 years now. It's been a wonderful experience. A lot of weather that I've seen. I've been at several offices. The first office that I've ever been to as a volunteer is the Lubbock, Texas office. And then I moved on to the Shreveport, Louisiana office. And then finally, I'm here at the Jackson, Mississippi office. So to say that it's never a boring day across lanes or across Dixie Alley is definitely something that I can attest to. And I look forward to talking with everybody, and it's a pleasure to be here.
All right, great. Thank you, Felecia. Let's turn it over to Mr. Mark.
Hi, everybody. I'm Mark Fox. I'm the meteorologist in charge at the Amarillo office. And I'm old, so I've got a fairly long background. I spent the first 10 years or so of my Met career as a broadcast meteorologist, and then got into the weather service in Fort Worth, then Amarillo, then Lubbock with Felecia for a little bit, back to Fort Worth, and now back to Amarillo. So we'll see what comes up next. So just have a fascination with especially communicating severe weather, and been fascinated since about 8, 9 years old or so. A lot of changes since then.
Great, thank you, Mark. Let's turn it over to Stephanie.
Hi, good morning, everybody. My name is Stephanie Sipprell. I'm an emergency response specialist at the Central Region headquarters under the Regional Operations Center. A lot of acronyms there. I have been with the Weather Service for about 13 years. I'm from Indiana, went to Valparaiso University, and was lucky enough to get into the Student Career Experience Program, which is now called Pathways. I've worked at 5 different offices, including Louisville, Kentucky, Northern Indiana, Chicago, Illinois, Wichita, Kansas, and Boston, Massachusetts before I came to Central Region headquarters. So looking forward to talking to everyone and learning from my panelists as well.
Great, thank you, Stephanie. At this time, we're going to take a turn over to Miss Tiffany O'Connor.
Hey, yeah, good morning, everybody. Similar to Summer, I am a FEMA liaison, not to SPC, but down at the National Hurricane Center here in Miami, Florida. So there's 2 liaisons at the National Hurricane Center, myself and Matthew Green. For myself specifically, I got involved in emergency management straight out of college. I started working for the state of Florida as their deputy state meteorologist at the Florida Division of Emergency Management. I did that for about almost 3 years, and then I came to this role here with FEMA back in 2015. So 2021 will be my 6th hurricane season here in this role. And both at the state of Florida and here at FEMA, I've been acting really as a liaison between the EM community and different areas of the Weather Service for this job, specifically the Hurricane Center. So what that means is helping answer questions that folks may have about, NHC products, making sure that they're aware of any changes as we head into the season, and then working with the Hurricane Center directly to help provide training to state and local and federal EMs. So one of the really critical parts of our job is managing the Hurricane Liaison team. And so I have our mission statement here. It's really to make sure that we're assisting with getting information out between that information exchange between the Hurricane Center and all levels of EM. And so the HLT is really a partnership between the Hurricane Center and FEMA. So the team is comprised of both Hurricane Center Mets and FEMA meteorologists like myself. And so I'm I've had a number of different storms over the past years. Seems like every hurricane season since I've been in this role has been pretty crazy. So I'm happy to be here and really looking forward to answering your questions and getting the conversation started.
Great, thank you, Tiffany. I'll just take a few minutes to kind of briefly introduce myself, but just want to take a moment to kind of cover some of the things that myself and really Tiffany also kind of do in her role as a liaison. We have a couple different FEMA liaisons within NOAA facilities. Currently, we have Tiffany and her colleague, Matthew Green. We have myself here at the Storm Prediction Center, and we're actually getting a new person on board at the National Water Center. So those are our primaries. And then vice versa, we also have a NOAA LNO to FEMA headquarters. So some of the things that primarily myself does, but also really represents us as a whole, is that we're looking to enhance that communication and dissemination of information between the entities, whether it be the HLT or the SBC. We're supporting their readiness with weather preparations and any kind of response operations. We're looking to enhance the GIS and the data capabilities and analysis for pre and post event impacts and damage assessments. We also are always working to develop and conduct training throughout the year, as well as supporting planning and exercises. So that's just a little bit about myself, but also applies to sort of the FEMA LNOs in general across the board. So this morning, we do have a couple of questions prepared that we're going to kind of go over. So we have 4 primary questions that we're going to focus on right now. And then the next slide before we end, we'll have 2 additional questions. And those questions are more geared towards sort of advice or experiences as a whole. So we'll kind of address these questions first, and then we'll turn it over to those ending questions or ending segments, just to kind of give a greater perspective and more in-depth discussion on some of the challenges and best practices that we've encountered when communicating weather hazards. So for this morning, we're going to start with the first question, and please do, if you have questions, you can feel free to speak up along the way in the chats. The way that I'm planning on running it is that we'll pretty much kind of talk about the 2 questions at a time. We'll address 2 questions, and then I'll sort of open it up to the board just to kind of keep a little bit of structure in place. And I think that the 2 questions that I have are tied together kind of makes sense. So to get started with, the first question we have is, what are the key factors to consider when communicating weather hazards to your partners? So I will open it up to the panel if anyone would like to give us would be brave enough to kick off our panel session today and discuss what key factors to consider when communicating weather hazards to your partners.
Hi, I'll begin if that's okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Just from what I've experienced, I think when it comes to our partners, they don't want to know the nitty-gritty details. They kind of want to know, when is it going to occur? Where is it going to occur? And of course, if it's going to affect their particular county or city, especially if we're talking about emergency managers. And when you communicate those particular entities, there's definitely some things that they have to take into consideration. When it comes to emergency managers per se, in my particular area, my county warning area that I'm responsible for, they are very vigilant and very much weather aware, especially since being here in Dixie Alley. And when we do have, say, a tornado watch or something that's going to be occurring later that day, when we address those particular entities, they're going to want to know, okay, because it's going to affect them opening a shelter, because they're very good about that, especially when it comes to tornado watches that's going to be occurring. And the thing about communicating these particular weather hazards, it has to be clear, it has to be easy to understand, and it can't be complicated whatsoever. They need to be able to read it and then take action, whatever that action may be.
Excellent points, Felecia. And if you'll allow me to go one step further as well, I mean, everything she just said was spot on. And I would like to add, though, it does come into play about knowing your partners. It starts, it ends with the relationships you have with them, because similar to Hearst County warning area, ours is the same way. We've got some people that want to know the nitty-gritty in the background, but it's not really the forefront for an overall thing. So there's no one way to communicate with everybody and everywhere, but it's our job to try to get to all of those different styles in different ways. And it starts and ends with relationships before the storms. It's the best time to really figure out who your partners are, how they like information, and if it's different from the way that you like to send information, one of you has to change, and it really has to be us.
Good points there for sure. Stephanie, do you have any comments from your perspective as an ERS?
I think what both Mark and Felecia talked about is definitely spot on. However, sometimes you do get put into situations where you don't have a chance to know your partner. I was able to staff the DNC, and you don't really get to meet the Secret Service all that much. So you kind of have to just go with the flow and figure out what kind of information they need and how they want it, and what triggers are for them to make certain decisions. So you have to be somewhat flexible as well. I think that's one of the biggest things.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I hadn't thought of that one too, of being flexible, because oftentimes you get asked a question and you're kind of wanting to know what's the underlying reason that they want to know that piece of information. You can sort of ask questions to dig more in it. If you don't know your audience, I think asking questions back to help make sure that you're answering the right thing can be helpful. But I think both Felecia and Mark really did sort of hit on the big points there. Knowing your audience, are they weather savvy? Are they really kind of just wanting the gist of the information and the key highlights there? Understanding their decisions, what is it that they are trying to do at this particular moment in time, so that you're providing the key pieces of information that are going to help them execute that or make a more informed decision. Another thing, I learned this when I started at the state. I was out of college and wanted to, you're kind of writing all the savvy weather stuff and wanting to talk about troughs and ridges. And my boss was like, they're gonna think you're talking about mountain ranges. So, I think it's it's important to make sure that you're using a common language. My coworker likes to say that if a meteorologist briefs that things look favorable, meteorologists or EMs are going to think they can pack up their bags and walk away. Things look good, but to the meteorologist, you may have a little glimmer in your eye. You're excited. Things look favorable. That means the storm's going to intensify. So, making sure that you're being careful about what word choice you're using, I think, is really important. In these briefings as well, or when you're interacting with EMs. And I think that just comes from knowing your audience too. You're going to know what words they're going to recognize and what key phrases that are going to help them kind of take action as well. And we have this thing in the NRCC, the National Response Coordination Center, that our boss created. It's like status, what, impact, so what are the actions, now what, and what are the limiting factors? And I like to use that because from a meteorologist perspective, I think Felecia hit on this. What is it that's most important here? You could spew out a ton of things. There's a lot of information at our fingertips, but making sure that you're getting to the critical, the what factor and the so what factor. Why does this matter to EMs? Because you could talk about a lot of things in a brief, but making sure that you're highlighting the so what really matters here.
Yeah,
Tiffany.
Yes, go ahead, Felecia.
No, I was just going to say that Tiffany brought up a good point about using certain terminology. If it's going to be overly complicated, then you're actually putting a big roadblock between getting your communication out there. They're not going to understand what it is that's going to be occurring. So no, that was just a good point, Tiffany.
Yes, and I agree with you 100%.
You'll lose them before you even get to the meat of the information if you talk too technical. So
absolutely. You know, sort of a little anecdote on that. When I worked local, I was working under a fire chief, and I was explaining a radar image to him, and I was talking about the velocity and the reflectivity, and he looked at me and he said, "You got to understand, I'm a fire chief. I have no idea what you're talking about." And I said, you know, in that particular moment, this is not always the case, obviously, but in that particular moment, I said, when red meets green, that's bad. And he said, that's what I understand. And it was actually that moment that kind of directed me towards what I do now, because I realized the disconnect between communicating meteorology to non-meteorologists, non-technical users that I hadn't before. So I always consider that before that event, I was sort of the, you know, early meteorologist who was naive to the communication aspects and not understanding what everyone needed. And that event really changed my mindset. And from that point on, really directed the direction that I took in not only local emergency management, but in my studies and research, and now with FEMA. So very, very important point to make, yes, with the audience is know what their, you know, knowledge level is. And I oftentimes will use the technical term, but I'll use the definition with it. So in my role, I say supercell a lot. So I will also say supercell, and in parentheses, you know, intense rotating thunderstorms. So that's something they understand, but they also get to see that and they kind of learn from it. Some of the key factors, for example, this morning I spoke with a regional administrator because of the severe weather threat we have going on today and the events of last night. You know, I know what he needs, and I know what all of the regional leadership and headquarter leadership needs, and it's different for each user. So understanding what different partners' needs are, what their level of understanding is, and in this case, you know, he always wants timing information. He wants to know timing. He wants to know the location of it. He wants to know, you know, the basics that we talk about: when, where, what, how bad. As Tiffany mentioned, you know, the so what, why do I care? Where is it going to be? You know, is it going to be in the Dallas-Fort Worth area? Is it going to be more rural? And then of course the time frame. Timing is the information I get asked most about in my role. So some of those key factors to consider, yeah, just making sure we know the audience, making sure that they understand what it is you're saying. And a lot of times, you know, us as meteorologists, we get caught up in the technicalities of things. So making sure that we're just using that, you know, common terminology, as we would say at FEMA, to communicate those hazards and information. Any other inputs from the panel before I move to the next question? All right. Well, closely related on this note is talking about the challenges. So for the panel, what are the challenges in communicating weather hazards to various end users? So we kind of covered some of the key factors, and maybe inherent in that was some of the challenges, but maybe let's take a few minutes here to kind of highlight some of the challenges. And if you have an example of something that happened, like in my case, where I thought I was explaining something well and I completely was not, you know, bring those points up too, because if we've had those experiences, it's likely that others have had those experiences too. And sometimes it can be something very simple that you don't even realize you're doing, like using a word or using an acronym. So what are some of the challenges in communicating weather hazards to various users? If we have anyone like to speak up, if not, I'll call on someone.
I've got an overarching example that everything that also that we just talked about comes down to. There's always a question after a briefing, hey, that's great, but what about my town? You've got to be able to get your point across in the larger scale, but then you're really having to get it down to what does that mean for me? I mean, your entire briefing, your entire graphic, whatever you're doing, communicating any kind of weather comes down to what does that mean for me? And in any case, I don't care if it's rural, urban, whatnot, there are several thousand different interpretations of what you just said. And so you've got to be very clear in what you're saying. Like my biggest example was a winter weather event during a relatively important football game in Arlington, Texas in 2011. I was using the word blizzard as a meteorologist would. Nobody understood what blizzard really means. So the choice of words, clarity is key. It's got to be able for to have to get your words out, unlike I'm doing right now, to where the end result is crystal clear to everybody in there. And if it's not, you need to really follow up with those questions, no matter how annoying they are. You follow up, and then you kind of help out with the relationships from there. So basically, you have to be much better than my answer just was. I'll shut up now.
Good
So
point.
Mark,
Go ahead, Felecia.
I was going to say, Mark, you did great. No, he brought up a really good point, though, when it comes to, it goes back to the first question, and I think myself and Mark hinted at that, how either there's going to be people who is going to want an overall picture, and then there's going to be people who's going to want the fine details. And there's been many times where after I do a weather briefing, especially if it's a high impactful weather event that's expected, several emergency managers, they would call me, and we have a lot of savvy EMs in our area, and they're going to want to know the fine details. They're going to know what the lapse rates are for that day. Like they understand that, and they're going to want to know what the hail size is going to be, and how the lifted indices, they understand that. There are some that really understands the meteorology terminology when it comes to severe weather. And like Mark said, yeah, it takes time, because you just got done with the briefing, and now you're basically doing 2, 3, 4 more briefings for your those weather savvy EMs. But you have to do it. You have to do it, and you just have to understand that that's just part of the job.
I do think one of the challenges is sometimes our message can get lost. So if you have a pretty complex severe storm system, for example, and the main hazard's going to be the really strong winds, 80-mile-per-hour winds going through an area, but you also mentioned the word isolated tornadoes. Sometimes I feel that the emergency managers or the planners will focus on the word tornado rather than the strong wind threat, which can cause as much, if not worse, damage. Same thing comes with flooding as well. So trying to communicate the number one hazard can sometimes get lost. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we have, and we need to improve on it and figure out analogies or different ways to communicate it.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's funny listening to Felecia and Mark, because their challenge is because they're more at a local WFO. It's kind of local weather specific questions. For us at the federal level, it's kind of at the front end. Do I need to pay attention to the storm that's way out there? We've ever since Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico and in the Virgin Islands, we've had one of the big challenges has been every year during the Cape Verde season, every couple days, you've got a new tropical wave coming off Africa, and it's highlighted with some kind of development chance. And from a headquarters perspective, and from FEMA Region 2, who serves the Puerto Rico, the island territories, is this something I need to be worried about or not? Is this one that's going to safely pass? It's really challenging when you talk about long range. How do you communicate long range stuff to people when there are such sensitivities in certain areas? And that's been a challenge, it's been a learning experience the past couple of years as we've kind of navigated that carefully. We've worked very closely with the Hurricane Center and have sometimes provided briefings way ahead of time when we normally wouldn't, to help make sure that we're all on the same page. Because oftentimes when you're in the outlook phase of the hurricane, the tropical weather outlook, there's not a specific track forecast to look at. And so you people are wanting to look at the forecast models and talk about the GFS and the Euro. And there's a lot of information out there to pull from. And so it's helping, let's have a conversation, let's get on a call, let's talk with the Hurricane Center, get their best thoughts on this. And trying to help set the tone so that people aren't going off and getting information from all over the place. Once we have a forecast, I feel like everybody can take a sigh of relief, and we finally have a track. We've got wind speed probabilities, we've got some stuff to look at, but when you're in those early stages and people are kind of grasping for information, it can be really hard to communicate what's most important here. You know, when are we going to start getting more information and trying to help set the tone? That's one of our biggest challenges, I think.
Yes, Tiffany, I think you almost have the issue of too much attention sometimes, especially on storms that you don't know where they're going to go or what's going to happen. And you kind of probably would wish people would hold on a little bit. And then I sort of have the opposite where, you know, I'm trying to communicate ingredients of an atmosphere to leadership who is not technical at all. And they're trying to understand that there's something going to happen that they cannot see yet. And so trying to convince them that something is going to happen that is not on radar, that is not ongoing, is very, very challenging. And also given the fact that, you know, not only can we not see it, but it can be really difficult to predict where and when and how bad that's going to happen in the severe weather world. So some of the issues that I have faced in communicating weather information, and this is not only myself, but really as a whole, is consistency. So I know that they're getting weather information from, you know, 10 different sources. This is an information age. They have access to just about everything. And so consistency can be a problem. One of our former administrators used to say, you know, if he had 2 watches, he never knew what time it was, but if he had 1, he always did. And sometimes, you know, having the wrong piece of information is somewhat helpful in that they can at least make a decision. But if they're unable to make that decision because they have 10 different pieces of information, that's really challenging to them. And so that's kind of why they have myself and Tiffany and Matthew and the other liaisons at FEMA here, because they kind of come to us and we're able to kind of put that in perspective. And sometimes the inconsistencies is not wrong, right? It's just different. It's going to be different at a local level, at a state level, at a federal level. So if they're a federal person looking at a local product, they might not understand that it's actually saying the same thing. And so that's one of the biggest challenges that I personally have seen, is I get a lot of questions sometimes. Well, so-and-so on TV said this, and so-and-so over here said this. So at least in my role, I'm as a subject matter expert for the agency and severe weather, I'm able to kind of put that together and give them the information as to why these gaps exist. And uncertainty is a huge challenge, especially in my world in severe weather. And I know Tiffany and others, I think, have all touched on this, is where's it going to go? When's it going to happen? How bad is it going to be? You know, what's our confidence in this? Uncertainty and how to communicate it, right? As scientists, we often try and communicate that as statistically, that doesn't always work. So finding ways that, you know, are effective with the public and the lay users and our end partners. And like, you know, Felecia alluded to, some of those local EMs, they're just as qualified as, you know, some of the forecasters are. So again, going back to knowing your user, but at the federal level, we don't always have that. And sometimes there's some that think they know a little more than others. So you have to kind of fix those too, in a way that is appropriate, and making sure that they understand, you know, what is real and where they're right and where they might not be so right. So that's sort of my input on that. Pending any other input from the panel on this topic, I'd like to kind of
actually, Summer, yeah, you hit a magic word that I'd kind of like to briefly hit on, and would love to hear everybody else's, you know, comments on it. But the word uncertainty itself, meteorologists know exactly what that means, and it's not a dirty word. To a lot of partners, not all of them, but quite a bit, uncertainty is a dirty word. And when you talk about uncertainty, then it brings into, oh, well, you don't really know what you're saying. And, you know, especially in your role and Tiffany's and Stephanie and Felicia's, you know, being able to look somebody in the eye to figure out just how confident are you, and to hear the human voice. I mean, the human voice, even over a phone, can really express confidence, or I really don't know what I'm saying. I think it's going to be stormy, blah, blah, blah. So uncertainty and confidence in getting those out, you know, you've got to get out of your meteorological mindset sometimes and really talk about the confidence in the forecast and not all the uncertainties that go into it, even though we've been trained since day one to know what all the uncertainties are, what the limitations in this forecast are. When you're communicating that, that's a huge challenge to make sure you and your recipient are talking the same language.
That's 100%. I'm glad you brought that up, Mark, because you're absolutely right. Making sure you yourself, not only communicating it, you know, terminology wise, but how you're projecting yourself. If I showed up to leadership on our 7:30 briefing every morning and just was kind of like, well, you know, it's kind of going to be weather today. They're not going to listen to a word I say. I have to show up. I have to be confident. I have to be assertive. I have to somewhat, convey myself maybe more confidently than I would, prefer to be, because I need them to understand this is something they need to focus on. This is where we are. This is what's going to happen. And I need them, I need to be a little bit direct with them. I need, a little bit assertive with them and making sure they do understand that. And when it comes to the uncertainties, you brought up another good point that, sometimes when things don't work out, I think it's important after the fact to kind of communicate why things didn't happen. So beforehand, it's important to say why things might not work out the way they do. So why might this work out? For example, yesterday, it was like, we're going to have to see how these conditions evolve if we get, certain parameters in a specific space. So making sure that we're conveying to them why, sort of the range of possibilities and why things might not be the worst case scenario, why things might not work out. But also after the fact, what happened? Why didn't it work out? Why did it work out? Was it worse? Was it better? And explaining some of those whys so that they understand, that it's not just sort of this voodoo magic science that they sometimes think and, make the joke about, right? That you can have a bad forecast every day and still have your job. So, making sure that they understand those things. And I have found success with my partners that when I do educate them before as to why this might not go this way, or after the fact as to why, that I've been able to really build a lot of trust and credibility with them. They count on me, they trust me, they come to me when they have these problems, when they need this information, because they know I'm going to tell them what I think is the most accurate thing I can possibly give them, and that I'm going to have a good reason for it, and I'm going to have a reason for why it didn't work out too. So some of those things are also important to consider. So very good points, Mark, to add to the conversation. Any other panelists like to add to that?
I just thought of something where another challenge that can occur is when it's a weather event that your area doesn't typically deal with. And for example, being in the South, that could be snow. We don't deal with that at all. Not every season do we have a blizzard, or we know we're going to have it. So knowing that not only is the challenge for our meteorologists at the office, because it's not something that we typically deal with year after year, but it's also going to be a challenge in ensuring that we're conveying the proper message of the impacts that's expected due to that particular winter weather event. And sometimes we can probably give a little too much information just because we want to make sure we get that out and people understand, because you can have an inch of snow that's going to just do a whole lot of harmful things on the road because we don't have any machinery that's going to clear it out, versus being in Chicago where an inch of snow is like another day in the neighborhood. So you definitely have to just be cognizant of making sure that you convey the proper message when it's an event that we just normally don't see. So that could definitely be a challenge.
Very good point. Very good point. Yeah, I deal with people all over, and when I have to deal with those folks in the, out in California, sometimes with random tornadoes that happen, they're a little confused with me. But then I deal with Texas, and they require much less support. So absolutely, making sure you differentiate with your users and what their knowledge base is, because they're all going to have different hazards. So anybody else? All good points. Anyone else? Okay. Okay.
Yeah, I have
open up to some questions.
Hi, I have a point about what we are talking, and I think I will bring the case of Puerto Rico. So we have a lot people in the social medias. We follow a lot weather page. And we have all the meteorologists, the professional meteorologists, informing about the weather hazard. And I have been noticing that some meteorologists struggle informing what is happening versus all these page who the people are not meteorologists. And there's a confusion about the weather information in the social medias. Like, for example, I saw people presenting a weather model and saying, hey, this will be happening, and show a picture of the weather model showing a huge hurricane will impact some area. And for some meteorologists, it's hard to explain, hey, this is just a forecast, this can have an error. I don't know if you know what I mean, but it's hard for some professionals trying to keep calm the population with the real information versus the people are not professional and are trying to create a chaos in the social medias about what is happening. I don't know if you know what I mean, but yeah, I just want to bring that point.
Thank you. Very good points that you bring up there that, folks are, trying to differentiate between the different, the good and the bad there, as well as some of the translations that we focused on. I know we've had some issues with some of the translations not being correct from many different languages. So Mark, I see you're unmuted. Did you have something that you would like to say to this question?
Well, yeah, to the question, I mean, I know exactly what he's talking about. It really comes down to making sure that you in our organization and trusted meteorologists are the trusted source. And there's social media experts out there, some that don't know blankety blank about what they're talking about. I'll try to clean it up a little bit. Some of those you've got to just ignore. Other people are going to pick them up, and you've got to be able to have some sort of message that will counteract some of the modelologists. The people that just show the models and here they are. But it's an issue, and it actually comes into the communication of weather hazards really changing for that next question, Summer. But this is one of them. There's weather information out there. When I went to college, you had the map room at Oklahoma where you could go find weather models. Nowadays, I can call 75 million different ensembles on my phone and kind of follow it along, and then think that I've got a pretty good understanding. But it really comes down to those key factors: knowing your audience, setting up your relationships wherever you can, which does include social media, and then kind of going from there and just counteracting strange information. I mean, there's not a severe weather day that goes by here without somebody posting Amarillo or other town is going to be hit. See, here's this model that shows it. And I know in my mind that model is garbage, but you got to come up with a better way to anticipate those things and communicate something positive.
Very good points there. Anyone else have any input on that one?
So,
oh, go ahead.
So when it comes to the social media and the models that getting sent out, when I was in Boston, we dealt with a lot of it when it came to every single nor'easter that came up the coast. So one thing we would take an account, or how we would change it about, would be, we know that there's rumors out there, or we are keeping an eye on the potential for a significant storm. It's never too early to begin to prepare. So that's one way you can always spin it, is, yes, we are keeping an eye, but you can always think about your emergency management plan, or think about what steps you would need to go about if this happened.
Felecia, did you have something you want to add?
Yeah, I was just going to say, a lot of the good points that Mark brought up, to me, has a lot to do with your relationship. If you have a really good relationship with your community, with your end users, that's where the trustworthiness can come in. And then they see you as the most trustworthy source when it comes to weather, versus somebody just sitting behind their computer and looking at a computer model. So I think it has a lot to do with getting into your community, let them see you and hear you and interact with you, which you could do that in numerous ways, especially pre-COVID. But there's ways that you can do it now, even with the ongoing issues that we're having to deal with. But it's that trustworthiness that comes a long way, that ensures that people know that I can go to the National Weather Service and rest assured that they're going to be telling me the accurate information.
Very good points. All right.
Yeah, I was gonna I was going to add one way we get it from a little bit of a different perspective, more of what they were talking about in Puerto Rico. Is we have our, some leadership want to look at models and windy and want to ask us questions about it. And it's good to spark conversation, but as long as they know to kind of come to us and ask questions to get more clarity on it and not, run with the model and start making decisions on it way ahead of time. But one way we've sort of combated this last year is we started having weekly calls the Hurricane Center would put on for a very small group of state hurricane program managers to just talk about what's going on out there, talk about the outlook, and then sort of talk about as we head into the weekend further down. And at least they could kind of set the tone. If people were seeing things in the models, they could help sort of put some context to that. And we sort of did something similar with leadership at FEMA headquarters to help just have a conversation a couple times a week and just reinforce the Hurricane Center stuff and what we know at this time. And I think it's all about just making sure those lines of communication are open and that they do come back to you as sort of the official source.
All very good points. And in fact, Mark, you sort of alluded to the next question, which is how has the communication of weather hazards changed in recent years and may change in the future? And some of the things to consider are, of course, this past year with COVID-19, certainly climate change aspects, as well as technology. I know, for example, I'm new to Snapchat only because my nieces asked me to do it, but I honestly have no idea what's going on there. So, but, I know someone that literally told me the other day that their daughter only communicates, with those types of things. So instead of sending text messages, they send Snapchats, which I don't quite understand. So I guess I'm getting old, but what are some of the panelists? I'd like to hear your thoughts on how, how communication of these has changed or how it may change, and maybe your perspective or thoughts on some of these, examples. If anyone would like to start.
It's funny. So we talked a lot about this with the social media. It's when my coworker started in this particular role at the Hurricane Center. I guess it was probably 16 years ago, he started, and he said one of the biggest challenges he had was just getting the information out to people. We had dial-up internet, I guess, at the time, and it was just people just couldn't even get the advisory information fast enough. And now we're in this total reverse world where there's so much information out there that people, like we just talked about, they're grasping for information and maybe not the right information or from the right people. And so we touched on that, I think, already, but that definitely is a challenge, is making sure that we're guiding people and getting them to the right info and the official sources of where to look. And one challenge that I've noticed with that is people have a need, a desire, I don't know if it's a need, for information earlier and earlier. We touched on this a little bit, but I'll get calls about storms that are way out there and we have a forecast track, but they gain a lot of interest and people are wanting to know if they're going to come towards the Northeast. And it's trying to answer those questions. People want information earlier and earlier, and helping to set expectations about when we're going to know information and when to come back and let's have that conversation on Friday. I think we'll know a little bit more. And COVID really did highlight this because a lot of the operational plans, evacuation plans that people had to put into place this past year, it extended a lot of their timelines. So there was more hoops and hurdles that people had to do to move people around for if there was going to be an evacuation. The amount of hotel availability was limited. So when you're trying to move resources, they needed more time to do that. And so the need for information became earlier and earlier, became greater this year. And so, like I said, some of the ways we combated that was having some weekly calls and just to sort of talk about, have the Hurricane Center brief on what's going on and talk about set the tone, so to say, as we're starting to talk about those longer range stuff.
Yeah, I agree, Tiffany. It's been an interesting year, but a lot of new things have been learned. You and I are embedded within our NOAA centers so that we can directly reach to them and then translate back out. And so the fact that we've had to be apart, it has been a little odd, since that's really why we're there, to be embedded within them, and so to find new ways and mechanisms of working together when we're so far apart all the time certainly has been a challenge this past year, and I know you have seen it as well. And as technology continues to grow, we're certainly using phones more often, text messages, and I know going back to the challenges, almost I have the issue of trying to get some of those graphics to the people that need to get them, is making sure they have the right technology there. So I think Felecia, you had unmuted, and then maybe Mark following her.
Yes, I was going to say that since COVID has definitely forced us to be more adaptable and flexible, right? And one of the things that we can do, or being overly reliant on, is technology. And for instance, our social media accounts, and more specifically, being a warning coordination meteorologist, I do a lot of Skywarn presentation or spotter presentation, and those would occur in person pre-COVID. However, since COVID, it has to be done virtually, and a lot of times I do that also just for the general public on Facebook Live, doing it there, and just being able to reach a larger audience that's not necessarily people who are only in our county warning area responsibility, but we've got people all over who has tuned into our Skywarn class via Facebook Live, and ensuring that we get that safety message out prior to our severe weather season that's going to be coming up. So just the technology has definitely been an aid in my opinion. If it hasn't before, it definitely has now. It just makes you not necessarily dependent on it, but it just makes you realize just how important technology is, since we're having to do a lot of things virtually.
Very good points. Mark, did you have something you'd like to say?
I've got something, but it's kind of on a different edge or a slightly different topic. So Stephanie, if you had something, I don't want to take your spot here.
No, go for it.
Okay, and it kind of comes along with COVID, but it's also climate change. It's also a bunch of other stuff. Everything's political. And I say that in the best of ways and in the worst of ways. So you really have to not only anticipate some of the reactions you're going to get, especially from those people that you know really well, but you kind of have to be ready for the unexpected with anything as far as communicating. You talk about a severe thunderstorm event in this part of Texas, it's not that big of a deal. But you talk about that same sort of event in November, even though you're giving all sorts of great reasons why the atmosphere doesn't care what the calendar says, somebody out there in social media land or somebody on a comment is going to start saying deriding global warming or anything like that. So as a communicator, one of the things that's really changed is you've got to have those answers pat and ready to answer in a positive, professional way, because most of the times I want to answer that in a way would be great for me. It's probably not the most professional thing to do. So I like getting paid, so I've got those answers kind of in mind. But really, the biggest change has been just the absolute amount of information, and people are out there drowning in all sorts of this data and all of this data that's available to them, but they're really dying of thirst for actual good information about what it means. And that's our job, is to be the translator of what does that mean for wherever that's going to be.
And to build upon that, it's especially for events that haven't occurred before. So when we had the snowstorm out in Colorado and Wyoming with 4 feet of snow, communicating that and having FEMA 8 say, is this really going to happen? You have to challenge yourself and to be assertive and say, yes, this is going to happen, even though they've been hearing about it for the past 2 weeks because of social media or other factors. You really have to stick with your message and communicate that yeah, this unexpected event near record levels or beyond record levels will definitely occur.
Excellent point. And that comes right down to it, because, you know, everybody judges every event. At least my view and experience has told me, you know, what they've been through before is the way it's always going to be. Well, I've been through thunderstorms in late December millions of times. They've never produced 13 tornadoes the day after Christmas in Dallas-Fort Worth. Therefore, I really don't have to worry about it. Sometimes you do. And that's that's a huge challenge out there.
Yes, complacency becomes a big problem for sure. Any other lasting comments on that one before we move to our last
I was
question?
gonna say we have complacency, but kind of in the opposite way of people who think they experienced the Cat 3, but in reality they didn't. So it's hard. You know, yeah, that is a challenge when you need people to leave and they're thinking, well, you know, such and such storm didn't affect me, so why would this one? And reiterating every storm's a little different, and it's really all about your location relative to that storm. And I don't know if that's necessarily answering this question, but Mark's point made me remember that is a challenge with communicating, making sure people aren't referencing an old storm and keeping each new event as this is something different.
All good points. Yes.
We have an audience member who raised their hand.
Okay.
Rachel, I believe, if you have a question, please feel free to ask it.
Oh, there you go. Do you hear me? Apologies.
We hear you now.
Oh, great. So I put this in the chat, and it's something that is coming up for me in my work. And I'm in the local government position here. And although I'm pretty tapped into the meteorology world, NOAA, NASA, I've been doing work with them for years. My thing that keeps coming up for me, which I'm really curious to hear about some of the experiences of, is accessibility. I'm working locally here with HCMA as well as our FEMA Region 3 folks with regards to making communication as accessible as possible. A lot of people don't recognize where that falls into. For instance, the first example I can think of off the top of my head is don't assume that a screen reader is going to pick up your maps. Don't assume that a screen reader or any other assistive tech is also going to pick up your graphics and PDFs. So including plain language is really important. And I know in instances of extreme weather events, that's an added extra piece of the puzzle, but I feel like it just doesn't get the focus that it really should. There are a lot of individuals, and I try to tell everyone, don't assume that someone doesn't need accommodations, even if they're a MET, even if they're a local anchor, even if they're an emergency manager. And so I'm just curious to hear, you know, what has been everyone's kind of experiences with that and where you see gaps that we can work on too.
Anyone from the panel have thoughts? I think that from my point of view, I personally, that's a very exceptional question you ask, and something that we often forget about in communication when we talk about communication. But you know, at least in my personal, you know, what I try to do to facilitate that is, for example, when I do my briefings, I try to describe the map. So a lot of times I've seen folks just say, well, we've got this enhanced risk over the Southern Plains. I try to say, you know, well, I understand that a lot of folks can see that. I understand that some cannot. And so I try to describe it in a way where, you know, it provides more details as if they didn't have that information. in front of them, either in text or visually speaking. So I try to kind of include both of those so that we make sure that those areas are covered. So that's just one thing, but I know that, there's certainly times where I do forget, when I'm talking about the enhanced risk for today, that I might forget and just say Texas, and I need to do better personally, I think, all the time, because when you get focused on the slides, sometimes it's easy to forget that you have those kinds of users. So that's just sort of my perspective, that I do try to kind of think about those things in advance. But and what's one way that I do. But does any of the rest of the panel have any input on some of the ways that they focus on those things, or ways that we could do better in that area?
Yeah, I mean, Rachel brings up some excellent points as far as gaps. Blind is a gap, because meteorologists especially love to draw maps, and those do not get translated very well at all. And when they do, it's the old George Carlin skit about the 0.5 miles east and west of a line 60 miles east of this area versus that area, which is even worse than not communicating at all. Deaf and hard of hearing is still a gap, although there's been some wonderful progress made in that arena. Another area is languages. Advisory and warning mean generally the same thing from what I understand in Spanish. And Summer, I believe you mentioned this early on about having some different and better translations out there into multiple languages. There's a lot of things out there, but one that we still have some gaps to move forward. And I like the way Rachel put it, that some of these things are not getting the attention they deserve. To counteract that, though, it really comes into some training and some processes that you may have as an office to make sure that your graphic can stand by itself if it needs to. If nobody can hear it, what you're putting out there can stand on its own. In our default biases is, it looks good to me, I understand it, therefore it's good for everybody, is a mindset that we continue to work on, not only at our office, our region, the entire area. And it's just something you've got to learn, make some mistakes, and throw your ego out the door if you make a mistake, and then just learn from it, and don't make the same mistake over and over and over.
That's a good point. I know personally, other than my communication background, formally, as far as actual training, I personally have not received any to kind of facilitate that process. So honestly, that's something that my, FEMA and the Weather Service might want to talk with their folks to kind of, work through that process to see what more can be done, because I know personally, and Mark, I see you're shaking your head, yes, that, that's not something I think that is readily talked about, and I think would be much added value to, anyone communicating weather information, no matter what sector they're from, so.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. As I said, I'm actually working on this on a local level, and I'm happy as a commissioner here in the district that works in the disability arena to provide any input and help as well. And it's good to know. It's interesting. Obviously, everything is going to be different in different localities. But if this is a larger problem, with regards to education, that's something that I'm willing to help be a resource for. Just so all of you know, if you ever have questions, I'm happy to be a resource for you too, and put you in touch with. There are a lot of colleagues of mine at the state level that are trying to do the same. I'm from Houston originally, and I know the Houston Commission has been doing a lot of work down there, but that's a great example of a region where their recent ice storm affected the community immensely in different ways. And it's, how do we take these lessons learned and apply them? Because if another, tropical storm, Allison comes in again, or if another Harvey happens, if we have the education out there for everyone who is a stakeholder, I think we can start to fill in a lot of these gaps. And back to what was said earlier about this falls into climate change and resiliency too, if you think about it. And so it's how do we find a way to ensure that as many stakeholders are educated, and if that means, you know, trying to create a training program nationally through NWS or, you know, whatever, then maybe that's something we should really look into, because we can't wait for this. And that's the thing, is that on top of the pandemic, we're also now in severe weather season, and these are lives at stake that require a lot more preparation with regards to all of this work than the, you know, and I hate to say the general population, because everyone will actually benefit from these type of changes if they're implemented, quite frankly.
No, these are all great points, Rachel, and I hope you know, you as a fellow FEMA, I hope you'll reach out to me and we can talk more about this, and maybe we can form a group of folks within FEMA and the Weather Service to kind of work on this project. And I have an idea of some training folks we could bring into the loop too. So please do reach out to me, and we'll definitely talk more about this, because I do think it's absolutely a need for sure.
Sure, and thank you all so much. It's nice to hear feedback from different areas too. It helps me to think of, well, what can I take to my meeting this afternoon with HCMA? So everything that I'm hearing here is helping me with my local government role as well. So thank you all.
All right, great, good discussion. Absolutely important to mention. Our last question on this part, pending any other comments from the panelists, is how to prepare in advance for communicating weather hazards. I know Mark had actually mentioned this in the beginning, but if the panelists want to just kind of briefly discuss, you know, 1 or 2 points on how to prepare in advance for communicating weather hazards, you know, just to make sure that, you know, it's not just during the event that you want to be talking with folks. So Mark, if you want to kick us off, because I know you can already mentioned that briefly earlier.
All right, to completely show my dorkiness, the answer is get down with OPW. Other people's weather is your best friend. You know, most meteorologists will go through, you know, radar scope or GR or whatever and really geek out about the hook echo in wherever it is. But kind of train yourself to think about, okay, well, what's the message here? What's the message for the enhanced risk today in Texas that is going to have nothing to do with Amarillo? How would we message that? And then just kind of, you know, find your group that you like to bounce ideas off of, and then also really build those relationships where that if your idea is horrible, they'll tell you, and it's not going to hurt your feelings much. And you kind of learn from that. So that way your decision making is going to get better and better and more refined. It's not going to happen overnight, but it's really going to help out. So working other people's weather is always a great thing to do, but kind of distance yourself from just the meteorology, if you're a meteorologist, of course, and to really think about what's the messaging going into that. Harvey is a great example of that. You've got this storm. What was the message taken away from most people? Oh, it's a Category 2, not that big of a deal, as we all know. And Harvey was pretty much a big deal. If Allison was going to happen again, how would you message that? You know, and then run it by a bunch of people when the weather is great, and just practice. And with that, it's going to come in with some trust, some relationship building, but you're also ending up with a much better product or service later on. So always be training.
Good point you make there, Mark, about following up after an event. At FEMA, we're big on lessons learned and after action reviews. So following up afterwards, you know, we can catch a lot of those things like, well, I didn't know beforehand, or I didn't know who to contact, or I didn't understand this. Lots of those can be solved in some of those. So very good points there. All right, Felecia, Tiffany, or Stephanie, do you guys have anything you'd like to add on how to prepare in advance for communicating weather hazards?
Sure, and I'm sorry that my video is just it won't let me start my video, and I'm not sure why that happened. But basically, in my opinion, I think that it has a lot to do with making sure you're careful with your words. And by that, I mean, when you're expecting some high impactful weather event, say it's going to be looking like a tornado outbreak day that the computer models has, there we go, that the computer models has been honing in on incredibly well in several days in advance. And it is then where you should be conveying that message through graphics, through email briefings, etc., well ahead of the event, so that when it gets to a day before the event and you start to do weather briefings via virtually, via conference calls, the things that you said prior to that, they already see like, okay, this is starting to ramp up. A good example is during those briefings, during those email briefings and those verbal type briefings, honing in on specific words, like if you're confident, particularly dangerous situation type of event is going to be happening. So using those words, not all the time, just when you are absolutely confident, that really starts to get the attention of people. And they start to say, okay, this is something that we're really going to have to pay attention to. So being careful with your words, I think, and using the appropriate words is going to help to get the communication out effectively.
Good points. Verbiage and, don't over sensationalize, don't under sensationalize, right? Want to make sure you get your point across, but at the right level. Absolutely. Good points, Felecia. Tiffany or Stephanie?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think Mark hit on this, the training aspect. We do a lot of that through the National Hurricane Program, which is a partnership with FEMA, the Hurricane Center, and the Army Corps of Engineers. We do a lot of different training classes for states and locals. We've had to pivot a lot this year towards online, but normally we're in person and we are meeting and talking and having conversations. We have a week-long class down at the Hurricane Center where we get to meet a lot of the state hurricane program managers or locals, and that's where you really get to hear their experience. It's not just us teaching them, it's us learning from them too. And so I think, it's getting out there and meeting folks and training and having those conversations. And part of that too is working alongside these people as they're making their plans, their hurricane plans. We have the hurricane evacuation studies specifically within the National Hurricane Program. We have FEMA program managers who are assisting and having conversations as the states and the locals are developing their HESs. So I think it's all about the training and being there to help with that planning process and learning as they're so that you're aware of those timelines when you're in an event, so you understand the decisions that they're making, and that's going to help you, going back to the first question, when you're trying to figure out what are the key factors here I need to communicate. Well, if you've been involved in their planning process, or you've done exercises with them, or you've trained them and you've had conversations during outside of the season or outside of severe weather season, you're going to be ready and you're going to know what you need to brief and when you need to brief it, because you've been intimately involved with them outside of the season. So that's what I think helps with preparing in advance.
Training is a great option to use there for sure, 100%. Stephanie, you got some final comments for us on this question?
Yeah, I think one thing is to know the local area, or know the area that you are communicating the hazard on. When I started in Wichita, Kansas, we were having flooding on the Arkansas River, which is what a lot of people call it, but down in Kansas, in that particular area, they call it the Arkansas. And I had an emergency manager tell me very quite clearly how they pronounce it. So by knowing the local dialect and also knowing the geographic area and where the issues or the weather hazards are going to be, that helps begin that trust and that relationship and building process, so then that they would have the confidence to make the decisions based off of your forecast.
Absolutely. I can think of some good examples myself there. So lots of learning. I've had to learn a lot about Texas and Louisiana town names. In Oklahoma, I live here, so I know those pretty well, but I've seen others do it in reverse. Kind of amusing. Good point to make, though. It's important. And sometimes you got to make sure, if you say it wrong, they might not actually know that you're talking about them. So, Any final comments from the panel on that question before I open it up to everyone for questions? Okay. Do we have any questions from any of the audience before I turn to our final slide to communicate some final thoughts for the day?
Summer, there was a question that came in via chat earlier.
Okay.
The question was, how did you all hear or learn about your current positions before applying and being appointed? Where can a graduate student look to learn more about the various opportunities available at the intersection of meteorology and emergency management within FEMA and the NWS?
That's a great question. That's actually one that is sort of on our final slide, so we can kind of go ahead and mention that a little bit. For me personally, I'll start. I was already working for FEMA when they decided to develop the position that I currently occupy. It didn't exist prior, and I just happened to be speaking with leadership who was responsible for creating that position, and they said, would you be interested in, you know, you already know all these folks in Oklahoma, you went to school there, you worked with them, would you like to go back and assist in implementing this position? So it was sort of a chance, happenstance for me that I was in the right place at the right time to work with those, but it was also the fact of my skill set. We have maybe a dozen meteorologists that I can think of within our agency. And so they found my background as a meteorologist and a local emergency manager very intriguing. And so it was sort of something that they really were interested in being able to kind of take advantage of in that skill set. And so I was able to utilize that to kind of get into my position. So that kind of answers the first part. The second part of your question in terms of how this all works. My advice is to be able to, find internships, paid or unpaid, get that experience in emergency management is really important. And if it's not in emergency management, in weather communication in general, at the Weather Service, they have those available too. But during the summer, I know they'll gladly take you on board for free if you have that opportunity. So get involved in those, or even nonprofits or even for-profits. There's plenty of opportunities to kind of get involved and understand those things. Me personally, my background, I was in meteorology. When I started my graduate work, I did not have the opportunity. I was actually a little bit before the degrees for emergency management came out. They had bachelor's degrees, but they only had one PhD program at the time. So I actually kind of created my own. Now they do have those options as well, but not that you have to go the emergency management route, but if you are in school, something to consider is to take communication classes or social science classes. Any opportunity that you have to kind of take some of those into account would be valuable, even if you just want to maintain strictly meteorology, because as we've kind of talked about today, the communication aspect is so important as we move forward. And if you could have a 100% accurate forecast, and if it's not communicated correctly, then it's pretty much worthless. So making sure that, taking advantage of those opportunities, and nowadays with the National Weather Service supporting the impact-based decision support services, I think that every meteorologist would benefit, even if they're more of a forecaster. So that's sort of my 2 cents. I'll hand it over to the rest of the panel if you'd like to address his question that he asked in terms of how you kind of got into your position, and if you have advice for those seeking to get into it.
I would just say one word, and that's volunteer. One of the best things that you can do is to volunteer, because you'll be able to see if this is actually something that you really want to do. There's a lot of people who felt that they wanted to work for the National Weather Service, and we encouraged them to volunteer. And once they did, they saw all the things that go with it. And shift work is not for everybody. However, at the same time, we've had the opposite, where people, they weren't sure, and they get into the Weather Service via volunteering, and they absolutely loved it, and they knew this is something that they really want to do. Same thing for emergency manager. Get with your local emergency manager. See if you can just shadow them for a day or two to see if this is really something that you really want to do, and then you'll be able to make up a good decision from there.
Absolutely.
I was going to say a couple things. For me, I think it was also just being in the right place at the right time. I had set up I was actually looking to go into the Weather Service, and I, had been volunteering at the Tallahassee office when I was in my first year of grad school, and a position opened up at the state of Florida in their EM department. And because I sort of knew people, I was able to apply for that and get in. So I think some of it is just making contacts within the weather community. And a lot of that comes from doing internships. Mine were unpaid, but it at least gave me the contacts and the connection to eventually find a job and it helped progress. So in a lot of places, they may emergency management divisions at the local or state level, or a WFO, they may have a project that you can work on, and it at least helps get you in the door and you're working on something that can help the office out. But it is also going to benefit you because then you're there and you're meeting people and you can sit in and at least have some awareness of what's going on in a local office or what goes on in an EM office and gain some familiarity, and it's a great resume builder. So the other thing is kind of get yourself out of your comfort zone. I wasn't really big about public speaking in college, but I really didn't have any interest in doing broadcast meteorology, but I took a broadcast meteorology class, and it just gets you comfortable. I mean, if you're interested in severe weather hazard communication, you've got to be comfortable speaking to people. So taking some kind of a communication class or taking a broadcast meteorology class just to get yourself up there in front of the camera and used to communicating hazards, taking complex information and sort of making it much simpler, getting that practice and that confidence at projecting your voice and preparing a briefing, I think is really important too. So yeah, I think it's really about making those connections, making those contacts, trying to find ways, trying to find internships. In USA Jobs, I had set up a filter to notify me if there were any meteorology positions open, and I saw this one open up at FEMA, and the position description really fit very well with what I was doing at the state EM department, and so it just kind of filtered up. So, but a lot of that came through the internship that I had at the WFO in Tallahassee, so definitely would suggest starting there.
Mark or Stephanie, you guys got some input on this question?
I would say something, but I couldn't say it any better than Tiffany just did.
Yeah, I mean, I did exactly that. I volunteered for free for 40 hours at the WFO Louisville office between my sophomore and junior year in college. And by doing that, getting the connections helped me get into the weather service. It helped me get into the Pathways program now. And by making those connections, I was able to move up in my career. So everything that she said was spot on, definitely.
And I was going to say, sometimes applying for positions within the weather service can just be challenging. So if you make those connections ahead of time and you know how to write, I mean, maybe you're good at writing a resume or you're good, but applying for positions within USA Jobs can sometimes be a challenge in and of itself. So making sure that your stuff is picked up. So if you've been working with some weather service people, you'll sort of learn about what's important to include in your application.
Dang, Tiffany even took my follow-up. I mean, yeah, that's exactly it. I mean that in a good way. Reach out. Your WCM in whatever weather office is usually going to be very open, and if they're not, then reach out to the MIC. But get comfortable being uncomfortable. And if you're a massive introvert, believe it or not, I'm one. But you learn how to do it, and you've got to put yourself out there and make those connections any way that you possibly can. And reaching out, just making those connections, that's first step always.
Good point. Good point. I'm an introvert too, but most people wouldn't guess that anymore. So got to do what you got to do though, right? And doing practice, that helps, right? But networking, Tiffany said, reaching out, like Felecia said, volunteering, Stephanie mentioned too, all those things. Any other questions from the audience today? Nothing else? Nothing else you're interested in learning about, or any clarifications you'd like to hear from? We've had a couple of great questions so far, so really appreciate those. We did kind of talk about the first question I had mentioned here, and then if the panelists, we do have any questions, feel free to speak up. If not, if the panelists have any lasting comments they'd like to share with us before I close out for the day. The last question I did pose was, are there any specific examples that you want to share and how things worked and the challenges and the handled? So we've kind of mentioned those throughout the session today, but really I just want to let the panelists have one final opportunity to kind of convey any lasting thoughts to the audience before I convey my final thoughts for the day. So we'll start with Stephanie, since you're first on my screen. What if you have any final comments for this session this morning?
No, I thought everything that the panelists said was spot on everything. Just if you want to get into the weather service, definitely volunteer. But it's not just about the weather service. FEMA has a great program as well. I know I've kind of kept an eye out, jumping ship on FEMA a little bit. But I think the biggest thing when you're communicating weather hazards is just be flexible. You never know what you're going to get asked. You don't know what curveball is going to happen. And sometimes your events can be curveballs themselves. So just be ready and to communicate on the fly at times.
Mark?
First ending point, which is essentially a massive Captain Obvious thing to say, but I'm going to say it anyway. Weather communication is hard. You're going to make mistakes. Don't worry about it. If you can, and I've never been able to come up with a good way to teach this next statement, but get used to reading audiences. You'll start to understand, especially if you're looking across the crowd, whether it be virtual like this or especially in person, you'll kind of get that sense of they're getting this or they're not. And both of those things will tell you something on how to adjust for next time. And when you do mess up something, throw your ego out the door and do better the next time. And learn from the questions that the audience is asking you, because there is a specific 100% valid reason for every question you're being asked. And I say that knowing that I've been asked some absolutely stupid things at the end of a briefing that I thought were absolutely clear. But one of the things that my mental checklist over time has gotten to be, okay, why were they asking that? Okay, because I didn't talk about timing. You know, timing and what's in it for me really comes down to a lot of things with severe weather. And when I worked at Region, it was with tropical weather too. Okay, when's the 35 knot wind going to be there? When's it going to leave? When can I do this? You know, learn from those questions that come afterwards, because even though there's always going to be the what about my town or what's in it for me, there's a reason for every question. Look beyond just what they're asking and ask yourself why they're asking it, and then adjust for next time.
Very good point. Felecia, what any lasting comments you'd like to leave us with?
Sure, I would just like to say, first of all, thanks for the great conversation that we had today. It was great talking with everybody. And one of the lasting points I want to make is that when it comes to effective communication, don't be afraid to also look at what other National Weather Service offices, how they're communicating, as well as other organizations. I can't tell you enough that I've learned a lot, not just within the Weather Service and how people effectively communicate. And a good example would be when my mother, when she was working, she's retired now, she would ask me several times, hey, can you take a look at this presentation to make sure that what I'm trying to say is actually being conveyed? So being able to step back and look at it from the opposite end as a user versus the person who's communicating can be very rewarding, and it actually helps to teach you, okay, I actually learned a lot from looking at it from that perspective, and that can aid me in being able to effectively communicate in my sector. So don't be afraid to look at other offices and other organizations and how they communicate effectively. Good
point. Actually, I didn't think of that myself, and I should have. Part of my dissertation focused on actually utilizing a communication model from the CDC, which is more relevant now than I realized 2 years ago. But very good point. Reach out, find those things. And in fact, if you're interested, the CDC has a really, really good crisis and risk communication model where it combines both crisis and risk. If you have questions, you can reach out to myself. But if you Google it, it's all available online and you can do it at your own will. So Tiffany, you have any lasting comments before I
Yeah, no, I think everybody hit really great points. I love Felicia's point about learning from others. I mean, you can probably listen in to another WFO's briefing and learn from it, and not be discouraged when you make mistakes. You're going to make mistakes in the, when you're starting out, and you probably always will throughout your career. Every event's different. It's going to throw you curveballs, and don't get discouraged. I think that goes back to a lot of it. That was a hard lesson for me to learn, is my tone and delivery of a briefing was really important, and practice and learning from others is really the biggest thing with that. And then I would also say, stick to those key things. What is the timing of the hazard, and how bad is it going to be? Those key points. And then knowing your audience and understanding their decisions by working with them outside of the severe weather event or throughout the year. On a briefing, you can see people nodding their heads. You can see that they're understanding the information. But if you understand the decisions or the actions that they're going to take afterwards, I think it can help give make sure that you're providing the most effective information on that briefing. But you're going to know if they understand it based on the actions they make after that briefing and the decisions that they carry out. So if you have a good feel for what their plans are and what the decisions are, I think it can help you as well. So yeah, good conversation today, and I was really happy to be a part of this. Thanks.
All right, great lasting comments. Any other questions from the audience before I finish up with my comments? Okay. Well, in addition to some of the comments that we heard, the panelists all had some great, not only final comments to say, but some good, information to put forward throughout. I was really excited to have these folks on board. Just to kind of leave you with for today, really appreciate your time today. I know we're all busy in this age, and I know, virtual isn't always the way to go, and it can be a little bit long, but we really appreciate your attendance today. And I'm really thankful to the panelists for being able to join us. I think it was a really great discussion. I personally myself learned a lot. And made some new connections that I might be able to reach out to. Certainly you have my contact information here, as well as some of the other folks in the board. You can certainly reach out to the board, and we can answer any questions that you might have or any ideas you come up with later. We'd be happy to. But I'll just leave you with the final comment for today. And that is this quote that you see here at the bottom of the slide, which states that public exposure to loss of life and property is increasing in spite of our best efforts in providing warning services. This new aspect of increasing population, increased exposure of large number of people to environmental hazards places a double burden on the profession. So this is something certainly that you might actually have heard someone say today, but this was actually stated by the National Weather Service director at the time in 1971. So this was 50 years ago. Same challenges exist today, that we have all of this going on with loss of life and property, and regardless of some of our science and advancements and technological advancements, we're still losing that property and that life. And the reason why I kind of closed with this was not only to kind of address, some of the hazards in general and the risk and threats that we face, but just to highlight the fact of communicating this hazard information is so important. And it's becoming more and more important as, hazards turn into disasters, right? Hazards themselves are not disasters, but as hazards and threats turn into those disasters, based on these vulnerabilities, it's becoming more and more important to communicate this information through the right mechanisms as technology continues to change, as new generations, come up and have different ways of reaching out to one another. So finding those ways of doing that and learning up, like I said earlier, new channels, is a learning curve, and there's so many, right? There's so many that you kind of have to think about these days. It used to be more singular, but now we have so many that we have to think about. We have different audiences for all of them. So it's important to kind of keep that in mind when we are communicating this information to, stay focused, communicate the information communicate the information you don't know, make sure you understand your audience, what it is they're looking for. Their knowledge level is important, their level of understanding, and making sure you are using that appropriate terminology that they are using. And like I think Mark said, sometimes you're going to make mistakes, and that's okay. You'll learn from it and you'll move on, and you'll know not to do that next time. It really is sort of a learning game. Because each user you speak with is going to have different, decisions, and they're going to have different perspective, and they're going to have a different knowledge level. So every time you have a different person that you're communicating with, it's going to be different. And so just kind of keeping that in mind, that if something's not working, try something different. Or as Felecia brought up, reach out to others, maybe your colleagues, maybe it's the Weather Service, it's FEMA, other agencies, look how they're doing things. find those avenues to sort of enhance it. If you have the opportunity to take classes, that's great. If you don't, look online. There's always, Googling things is helpful, but reach out to some of the folks and the resources that are available. So like I said, this quote was 50 years ago, but it's still relevant today. And I find it quite interesting that, he was noticing that even though they were making advancements in the scientific process and warning process, we were still losing life and property. And today, in spite of, in addition to, climate change and resiliency and population growth, communication is ever more present and important now than it was even 50 years ago. So just keep all those things in mind. So I really appreciate the panelists' time today. You really did give some great insight. And like I said, I learned a lot. I think you all had some really good perspectives. So I appreciate that. I do appreciate the audience for joining us. And like I said, if you have questions, feel free to reach out to myself. I'm sure the panelists would be more than willing to speak with you. And if you need, you can also reach out to the board and we can get you in contact. So follow us on Facebook and Twitter. And with that, I will leave you all for the day. And thank you again for your time. And we'll see